From making over $200 million in his NBA career to declaring bankruptcy just 2 short years after retirement, the story of how Allen Iverson went from luxury to near poverty is one of the most fascinating things you'll ever hear. Here's the story of how AI went broke. Allen Iverson's spending habits were much like his style of play on the basketball court, a gunner who was always prepared to flex all his power at once. I mean, this enabled him to become the great player he was, but also would end up nearly becoming the fate of his destiny. AI was barely 6 feet tall. He weighed maybe 170 pounds, but even that may be a stretch. He's one of the very few great athletes ever that built their catch because of the size and rebellious persona. Iverson became arguably the most polarizing player in the history of the NBA because of this. If anything ever fogs your memory of the type of specimen Iverson was, just remember the legendary quote from Kobe. We should all be fortunate that Allen Iverson wasn't 6'5". By the time Iverson entered the NBA, the game was still relatively unfamiliar with the crossover and certainly far from the pop cultural splash it's become today. So in many ways, fans saw a whole new type of player, from size to handle and marvelous ability to play in a big man's game.
Iverson has Jordan, the crowd is into it, Allen shakes free, gets two!
Speaking of size, AI's size would likely be a downfall to any other player's game, but for AI, it defined who he was and what he meant as a basketball icon. He absolutely revolutionized basketball. To the kids who thought they couldn't play the game at the highest level because they weren't big enough, their hero became Allen Iverson. His crossover as a rook on a prime Michael Jordan, the step over Tyronn Lue in Game 1 of the 0-1 finals, the interview he ranted about practice, it was really the moments like these that made Allen Iverson a beloved figure to fans. He never won a championship, but took a game off the eventual three-peat Lakers when he dragged his Sixers team to the finals in 2001. That will forever be his defining moment in a legacy that was jam-packed with bombshell mic drops, ankle breakers, and iconic moments. But that's where the ball dropped for Iverson.
Iverson from way downtown.
When you're a superstar NBA player that is famed for your pitbull persona and dazzling showmanship, a lot of your dire weaknesses are often overlooked or not even realized. For Iverson, apart from the issues he had with the coaches and consistently failing to be effective with championship caliber players around him, his financial decision making nearly put him through an unfixable economic disaster in his post-playing career. Do you remember hearing something about AI not being able to even afford a burger? This was a multi-millionaire just a few years earlier. Allen Iverson has always been a household name, so it shouldn't come as a surprise if he's the only millionaire athlete who went completely bankrupt that you've ever heard about. It happens more than we think, but only hear the story when said player has the stature and popularity of a guy like AI. Just like Iverson was hardly held accountable for certain actions on the hardwood, he clearly wasn't held accountable for some of the egregious choices he made with his money. Now, we don't exactly know the full story of AI's filed bankruptcy in 2012, but we do have some details that reveal the gist of what was really unfolding with AI, leading back to the prime of his playing days. According to numerous reports, AI's monthly budget was the #1 culprit in him nearly entering financial desperation at one point in his career. He reportedly spent so much money on others that people began relying on Iverson to entirely support their expenses and needed a budget, which even for a pro athlete making millions, it's a dangerous route to take. Iverson would support over 50 of his close peers and friends financially each month. Over 50! You might be wondering just what AI's monthly spending looked like. Well, here it is. Iverson was spending at least this much on some of the regular expenses every month. For clothes, he spent at least $10,000. On restaurants, at least $10,000. Even on grocery shopping, another $10K. Dry cleaning, around $1,500. On car insurance, and wait till you hear this, an impossibly high $12,000. And paying mortgages and creditors, a staggering $130K. So let me add this up for you. He was spending a bare minimum $175,000 each and every month of the year. That more than triples the annual salary of most ordinary people. So think about it. Over the course of a year, that number vaults to over $2 million. $2 million spent each year on any and everything except for yourself. I mean, I guess it's nice to know he had a big heart and was willing to go out on a limb to help people, but I mean, come on, $2 million? We can't even begin to imagine what that number turned into if you factor in AI's personal expenses and the things he would heavily spend on. That's not to mention how Iverson reportedly was fined over $2,000 in just parking fines in the span of just a few of his earlier years in the league. Even in the later parts of his career, Iverson reportedly would spend upwards of $50,000 every night at clubs. After his max contract he received from the Sixers expired in 2009, Iverson earned a much smaller salary, collecting roughly $440,000 and $1 million in his last 2 seasons, respectively, before calling it a career in 2010. And if we learned a thing or two about Iverson's spending habits, those amounts are insatiable insatiable for him. Especially after learning about his ridiculous spending behaviors, it shouldn't be baffling to anyone to know that this guy actually couldn't afford a burger at one point. A famous story of Allen Iverson is told often whenever the talk of his bankruptcy comes up. At one point, Allen Iverson was so rich that he went and bought a new car when he couldn't remember where he parked his car at the airport. He didn't even bother trying to locate his vehicle. That was probably worth millions. Iverson was throwing money around like they actually grow on trees. It's such an old cliche. But never have I ever come across a story that so bizarrely matched this cliche. By the time Iverson's career ended in 2010, it was reported that his accumulated net worth sat around $200 million, which by normal standards, the money he collected would be more than enough for him to live off of for the rest of his life. It would have obviously made great contributions to the next generation of the Iversons, but clearly that never came close to transpiring. After routinely failing to pay off large sums of debt, the most notably his owed payments totaling over $900,000 to a Georgia jeweler distributor, Iverson did something that I'm sure even shocked him. He filed for bankruptcy. Years upon years of poor financial decision making and flat out unforgettable spending, it came to this for Iverson. AI, not to the knowledge of many, came from quite the poverty-stricken upbringing. Here was a young man who put all of his marbles on his supreme basketball talent. That talent got him to the pros and relieved him and his family of difficult financial burdens for years. Realizing that he legitimately squandered 99% of his once unbreakable wealth probably terrorized Iverson psychologically. However, despite being millions into debt and being stuck in a seemingly unsalvageable situation, there was, with a stroke of pure good fortune, one huge way out for Iverson. Fortunately for him, a decision he made early in his career would eventually save him from total financial collapse. In the midst of all his antics and series of bad decisions as a very young man, Iverson made one enormously valuable decision in 2001 when he signed a very shrewd endorsement deal with the company Reebok. When Iverson's ex-wife filed for divorce in 2013, the deal with Reebok came to fruition. The deal would afford Iverson $800,000 annually for the rest of his life. A humbling sigh of relief for the once multi-millionaire. $800,000 at this point seemed every bit as equivalent to the nearly $20 million he once made in a season in the NBA. On top of it all, Iverson would be blessed with a whopping $32 million trust fund, but not until he turns the age of 55 in 2030. He has to wait a while for that money, but man, talk about an incredible insurance policy. And at this point for Iverson, he just needs to stay the course and play his cards right. If he does that, he'll be in the position to secure himself, his family, and his future families for many years to come. In retrospect, the life of Allen Iverson from his college days to a few years after retirement is one of the bizarrely thrilling stories you'll ever hear about. The 5'11" basketball assassin turned pop culture icon and then a seemingly unfixable mess. What he did on the court forever revolutionized basketball. If you call Iverson your idol or your hero, it's best you follow his mannerisms strictly on the court. But jokes aside, what ended up happening to AI is a story that all pro athletes need to learn from. Even today, financial education and responsibility isn't given the proper recognition it calls for. Look, we're all happy for AI and how he was able to resurrect his financial freedoms, but what a journey it was for the Philly legend. After all, financial etiquette takes awareness and, well, just practice. Yes, we're talking about practice.
I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we talking about practice.
If you thought the AI story was crazy, you'll love our video on the stories that prove Kobe wasn't human.